Welcome to Every Church a Peace Church, a program that promotes the belief that the church could turn the world towards peace if the church lived and taught as Jesus lived and taught. Welcome back for another wonderful episode with an exciting guest, John J. Carmody. John Carmody is a former United States Marine, a Vietnam veteran. He's earned the Silver Star Medal and 2 Purple Hearts in Vietnam as a platoon commander. But he's off that battlefield and onto a new battlefield, a battlefield of nonviolent Christian love. And today we're going to be discussing that change, that conversion from forces of destruction and war to the promotion of advocacy for the nonviolent love of Christ. John is the director of the Christian Center for Nonviolence. He's a neurobiologist by profession. And we're going to have a wonderful discussion about what he's doing at the Center for Christian Nonviolence and about the change that he's made from growing up as what we would call a war hero. Right. And now an advocate for just what nonviolence means and should mean for the humanity. Welcome to Every Church Peace Church, John.
Thank you, Don.
Tell me, how did you make the conversion from a Marine commander of a platoon in Vietnam to where you are now as director of the Center for Christian Nonviolence?
Well, as most people develop their consciousness in a cultural milieu, I think I took my cues primarily as I was growing up from what we would normally consider to be the structural entities that are responsible for educating people. For example, schools, family, government, military, corporations, and also informal institutions such as radio, TV, books, magazines, movies, peer pressure to reform. These entities are very important in forming the consciousness of an individual as they're growing. And I think that what I seemed to pick out of that milieu was an affinity toward competition and an affinity toward dominance, whether it was on the football field, on the basketball court. And my dream was, at some point in time, I don't know really when this arose, but there was a strong inkling that someday I would be a Marine. Mm-hmm. And
well, that's a good choice if you're looking for competitive dominance.
and I think that our culture portrays war and specifically the Marine Corps as an elite fighting force. And so there was in the back of my mind this awareness that it would be quite an accomplishment to actually become a Marine and participate in the Marine Corps. So I did join the Marine Corps and went through officer candidate school, was commissioned and did a tour of duty in Vietnam. And it was in Vietnam that I realized that being a Marine was more than just the glory and the really the affirmation of society of an elite fighting force, a member of an elite fighting force. I think that what I saw and what I experienced in Vietnam caused me to start to question the legitimacy of war as a human activity. In fact, I can remember one very striking experience in Vietnam that we had gone out to free a village that had almost been overrun by NVA forces. And one of my responsibilities after this firefight was to go through the village and make sure it was secured, make sure prisoners were taken, and make sure the civilians were in fact safe. Mm-hmm. And I came around the corner of one of the hooches, and there was a North Vietnamese soldier sitting on the bench. And he had a gaping wound in his thigh. You could actually see his leg muscles exposed. And so one would think with all this training and in the heat of combat mm-hmm. that there would be a defensive posture taken by me and then the attempt to kill this person. But when I saw him, this is the first time that my eyes actually looked into the eyes of a Vietnamese soldier. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that flashed in my mind was brother. Mm. And it really wasn't until 20 years after my experience in war where I was able to attend a conference on Christian nonviolence. In fact, the title of the conference was The Theology of Christian Nonviolence. And it was during that conference that I became aware of what gospel nonviolence was and what Christian love was. And I knew at the moment that I was experiencing that my life would have to take a dramatic turn in order for me to conform my being with the message that was taught so clearly in the gospel, but which was hidden from me by my culture and also to some extent by my church.
Yeah, and I guess that's the problem, is that it's difficult to promote the notion of Christian love if while you're also promoting the need to kill and to dominate as a soldier. You always wonder, just you don't often see a chaplain in the military talking about go out there and love your enemies.
Right.
And I mean, I wonder what would happen if a chaplain did emphasize
That's
that. Probably be reassigned to another task.
That's
but
for sure.
it's interesting that you had this immediate conversion of maybe not then, but when you saw the eyes of the enemy, the soul of the enemy, quote unquote.
Right.
You did not see the enemy, but you saw another human being. And I think that's the instinctive part of being a human being, is that there is a part of us that's there that immediately loves another person.
Right.
But it needs to be developed and nourished.
Right. And I think that was what was so striking to me about that event, that, you know, I was adrenalized, I was really in the middle of a combat situation, and for that thought to come crashing into my mind that this was brother, this was not enemy. In fact, as I went through the workshop on Christian nonviolence, I became aware that really the existence of an enemy is an artificially created reality. The enemy to us is really someone that God puts in our path that is most in need of our love, rather than retaliation or retribution or harm or insult. It's an opportunity for us to express a deed of Christ-like love, and in that way possibly transform this person in a direction that moves them closer to the good rather than pushing them away from us and having them continue to follow the path that they were following before encountering us.
Yes. Well, how did you develop, after you attended this conference, after you were able to share with others this feeling of where you placed yourself in the human community, how were you able to develop the movement that you took from to the point where there are no more enemies, there are just brothers and sisters? How did you develop that?
I think,
how would you, for those of us that do struggle with the notion and the commandment that we should love our enemies, how do we do that?
I think the pivotal thing for me that came out of this workshop was an understanding of what it meant to love in the Christ-like sense. In fact, if you look at what Scripture scholars say about the love that is expressed in the New Testament, in the Gospels, it is a love that is different from the love that is normally culturally endorsed. This is a love that's really known as eros, and it's the love that actually asks or demands something in return. So if I do something nice for you, then I expect you to do something nice for me. If you do something bad to me, then it's completely within my realm of possibilities as far as responses to do something that's not so nice to you. And the whole idea of Christian love, which is agape, it has really two irreducible dimensions. The first is a willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. So if I'm willing to suffer insult, if I'm able to endure bodily injury, you know, in the midst of my trying to move forward as far as a peace effort is concerned, then I'm actually fostering one component of what it is to live in Christ-like love. That is the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. And I think that's a lifelong struggle, because I think as we're nurtured, as we grow, as we participate in sports, as we watch movies, and thousands upon thousands of violent events, we're actually being nurtured to respond in a way that really demands retaliation. rather than compassion or mercy.
Yeah. It is like, I guess our culture makes it unnatural for us to love our enemies.
Right.
But God's will, if it's exampled by the life and teachings of Jesus, suggests or commands that we take this path where we do love our enemies and are willing to suffer and to die in the bodily form in that love of enemies. I guess that's really the crucifixion. That's the Christian Christ example.
I think so, and that's obviously very powerful. And the other component, other than the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation, is a willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocity. So it really attenuates the whole notion of wanting to get something in return. So one does something that is kind, one does something that is merciful, one does something that is compassionate, simply because the person on the other end is in need of that, not because of the value that you're going to get back as a result of participating in that particular kind of activity.
Yes.
And I think that for me, to actually take that back to the home, where I ruled by dominative power, and that I, controlled through force, that I controlled through fear, that I controlled through intimidation, my children and also my wife. And so that was the first struggle for me. It's okay to have that moment, in the midst of the workshop, that this is truth. But it's a far greater step to actually try to live that out. In this case, in the family environment where you live with people for a long period of time and they know precisely, how to antagonize you, if that, in fact, is what their course of action is at a given moment. And so the whole idea is that every time that happens is to look for a way, to be compassionate, to be kind in return. So what you're in essence doing is, for example, if you hit me and I hit you back, we have two evils, so to speak. Very mild form, but still, there's hurt that's exchanged in that. If you hit me and I do absolutely nothing, and psychologically over time that's going to have an effect, and it's going to be destructive, because a human is designed to respond, in the face of harm, in the face of evil. So if in fact, though, I return an act of kindness for your act of insult or whatever it happened to be, or your physical hitting, then I've actually used the stimulus of the harm or the hurt to bring an act of love into existence which wouldn't have been there before. So you use the evil really to generate good, and that is really the only way that we'll ever overcome evil, and that is to learn how and to live a life that is exemplified by the returning of some good for all the harm or every harm that's actually done to us.
Well, that's a departure from the culture.
Yes.
And particularly the political culture.
That's right.
Not only for the United States, but in most nations, there is this competitiveness.
Right.
The economic systems are competitive.
Right.
Religions are competitive. There's a lot of institutions that are competitive and are creating, as a result, this violence. So it's important for us really to look at the true meaning of Jesus' life and teachings, to give us a good idea of how we are to be secure and to be free.
Right.
Because I believe that we all want to be free. All people want to be free. I think that's the innate, when you saw the enemy as brothers, I think we all see each other as brothers, but we're trained to see them as enemies. John, we're going to take a little break, if we can, and enjoy the sounds of the Milkshake Quartet with Christine Mayfield. And they're going to be singing a tune that was made and written by Donny Hathaway called Someday We'll All Be Free.
Shine to hold on tight, and you will last. Keep your self-respect, your manly pride. Get yourself in gear, keep your pride. Never mind your fears. Brighter days will soon be here. Take it from me, someday we'll all be walking tall. Hold your head up high. Lay your dreams right up to the sky. Sing your greatest song, and you keep going, going on. Take it from me, someday we'll all be just wait and see. Someday we'll all be free. Take it from me. Just wait and see. Someday we'll all be
Thank you, and thank you, Milkshake Quartet and Christine Mayfield, for bringing us that song and that spirit. We're here with John Carmody, a former U.S. Marine, Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts Vietnam veteran. And we're talking about violence and the nurturing of violence, and how you grew up to join the Marines, and now you're growing up farther to be an advocate of nonviolent love of friends and enemies. John, how do we nurture the ethic of nonviolent love? How is that done?
Well, I think the primary way that the individual nurtures it within self is to actually incarnate it, to actually make it a lived experience, so that their relationship with others is based upon these 2 principles, or these 2 qualities that we talked about earlier. That is, the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation, and the willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocation. But it also must be known that our developmental course in our particular culture is one that is inundated by an example of, or literally by the time you're 16 years old, it's been estimated that you've actually seen 100,000 incidents of violence. Violence used as a means, as a mechanism of resolving conflict, resolving disagreement. So as you're actually experiencing that, what is happening is that different parts of your brain are actually being set up in a way that is reducing your ability to experience empathy, to experience care for another person. And this just isn't some ephemeral, loose-fitting kind of arrangement. It's actually a hardwiring of the brain so that you're using different pathways than a person who has been nurtured as a caring, compassionate person and who has not been exposed to this multiplicity of violent acts. And then if you overlay lack of stimulation, for example, in the earlier years of the child, if you overlay the inability of the parents to interact affectionately with a child, then you set up another whole set of possibilities as far as the child being open to, for example, stressful type environments or stressful type activities in such a way that their level of fear is much more greatly expressed than our level of fear. So this particular kind of development, a lot of violence without the nurturing, without a lot of stimulation as far as positive educational activities are concerned, can actually alter the ability of someone to withstand fear. And so this fear conditioning becomes the trigger for them to actually participate in violent activities. So if you put someone in the milieu of a war, for example, a battlefield where they feel fear all the time, then what happens is that they stop accessing cortical areas, that is, these areas of the brain that allow us to think through things clearly and go through a multiplicity of possible choices as far as our actions are concerned, and then start functioning at the lower brain level, literally at the level of the reptilian brain. So when I look at myself on the battlefield versus how I look at myself now, I literally had to shut off my cortex. I literally had to attenuate this sense of empathy, which is really trained out of you to some extent during the military training, and function only in a survival mode.
Well, it seems like the training to be a good soldier is to be a bad human being, and the need to strip away the humanity,
Right.
so that you don't that you do resort to
Right.
killing rather than loving.
Right.
And certainly those images are just part of our experience, and it is a parent's responsibility to try to redirect the child's, your child's or other children's attention away. You can't do it completely, obviously, but you can at least balance it out with a nurturing of love.
Right.
And I think that's really what our responsibility is, not only as Christians, but as just human beings, and part of the global community, where we do nurture images of caring and compassion and love. That's the will. That's God's will.
Right.
And the way we treat our environment. Is something that is also how we treat our fellow animals and the plants that we depend upon for our life is all combined in the need to love our environment. Don't you agree?
Oh, I think so. I actually think that we have the responsibility for maintaining that delicate balance. And I think that even if you look at some of the things that are going on with respect to the war, for example, in Iraq, that we know that the United States is using weapons that contain U-238, which is a radioactive substance. It's used to make the rounds that are fired at the Iraqi tanks harder so they can penetrate the wall of the tank, just like a knife going through butter. But when that round hits the tank, it's exhibits a phenomenon known as, it's really a pyrophoric round, so it bursts into flames, and so the people inside the tank are burned, but they actually are sprayed with an aerosol, literally, of alpha particles of radiation. And of course, this drifts, you know, over wide areas. And the half-life of U-238 is something like 3.4 billion years. So we're altering, you know, environments as a result of our participation in war. So rather than, you know, providing food, you know, rather than helping them, we're doing things that, for example, are going to cause severe health problems and environmental problems in Iraq for as long as we can imagine.
And you know, that idea doesn't, the people who make and shoot those rounds of depleted uranium, their only goal is to be able to penetrate the wall of the tank.
Right.
The idea of what's going to happen 1,000 years from now is not, or to the environment, is just not part of the equation. And I think that our responsibility as human beings is not only to be caring about those human beings, those plants and those animals that come after us 1,000 years, 10,000 years from now. And true enough, in 10,000 years, there'll still be that depleted uranium that was shot through the Iraqi tank.
Right.
And that's a sadness, and we need as a part of the human community to be able to confront that, to acknowledge that, and to try to change that. Christ died as a sacrifice to change the political and the religious norms. And this is something that if we are to be Christ-like, we must also be active in our ability to change.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, I agree, absolutely. And I think that oftentimes people look at the death of Christ as a stark and irrefutable statement that a life of nonviolent love is not the way to overcome violence, injustice, evil, and death. Because that event in and of itself, left isolated like that, is no more than that. It's just someone who has died, someone who was living a specific way, and there's in no way whatsoever that this death has actually brought the cause of nonviolence along. In fact, it's destroyed by the nation state.
Well, we know that Christ's resurrection shows that there is a overcoming of that death. And John, I know that time has just brought us, we have to conclude, but I want to thank you for being with us, and I hope you will come back for another program on Every Church Peace Church. I want to thank you all for being with us. Go to the websites, give John a message, and thank you for being with us. Seek peace, find peace, and be peace.
One to another.